One day you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.
Thursday night at 7 p.m. on the East Coast, 4 p.m. on the West Coast. And it's time for Narrative Live again with Eric Garland. How are you, Eric?
I am great.
And I'm Zev Shalev. It's good to be with you tonight. There's been so much news tonight. I was complaining on Twitter a while ago that I didn't know how we'll get to it all. So we've done some culling, done some selecting, and we've got a good show ahead for you tonight. In the second half hour, Michael McKay will join us and he'll talk about Ukraine, about the big surge from Russia, or the expected surge from Russia, of all these military men that have been drafted, if they are actually able to draft 300,000.
Men, let's not go so far as military. They are upright, bipedal hominids.
Yeah. But, you know, it's interesting that there are more people running away from Russia and more people trying to escape Russia and this draft than are actually being drafted. So that's going to cause economic chaos in Russia, along with many other things. So not going well for Vladimir Putin, but we've got some other interesting things as well from the Russian file tonight, because we'll also talk about Deripaska and his mistress, something. I don't know what she is. Baby mama? I don't know. I guess. I don't know.
Twin anchor baby, Russian oligarch conspiracy, people.
And because it's just, you can't make this stuff up. And there's other espionage cases we'll talk about a little later on. But the story that I cannot believe today is that the wife of a Supreme Court justice went before a congressional hearing to testify in front of the Jan 6th congressional hearing about the attempted coup of January the 6th, and told this hearing of men and women who are, you know, adults and know the truth about what really went on, that she still believes that Joe Biden is the president because of fraud. She basically still believes in the big lie, and she thinks it's really Donald Trump's presidency that has been stolen. Still, she still believes this. She's the wife of Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice. I am, I've done a lot of digging into Ginni in the last few hours because I cannot believe the gall it takes to go in front of a hearing and claim this again, or it's just delusion. I mean, it could be that we're dealing with someone who's extremely deluded.
So you got on the Chiron there, believes the big lie. I have to say, most times I don't like the term the big lie. Yeah, it fits.
It's my banner, so that's why it's there. But yes,
it's a good way to sum up the entirety of the fictional story of whatever the Italians hacked into a speak and spell and changed all the votes, and really Trump won. It's all fantastical. Let's just call it the big lie. But I don't like it in a lot of cases because the people there don't believe the big lie. They're not useful idiots who have glommed onto a story that they find emotionally satisfying. Some of the people are like Alex Jones is an active, toxic propagandist using information as a weapon in a traitorous way against his country. He doesn't really believe that stuff. He's been doing this for too long. But there are a few people left who are really that nuts and really do buy this. And Ginni Thomas, you would think of as a very worldly person, married to one of the elites of planet Earth, really, one of the top legal minds in the United States. But she has a history of being in cults. So she has this psychological profile. I think she believes it. And, at this late date, everybody else who was involved with this, who was cynical about it, they took the fifth, right? Or, they hedged or whatnot. And she's like, no, It was. I'm correct on this. This is
Yeah.
fraud. I mean, I don't even think Giuliani didn't try that. Mark Meadows didn't try that. Navarro's was like, I'm not showing up. They didn't get in there and go, no, but Trump should have been still president. Like, they know, but she
doesn't.
She believes it. She's a true believer.
Which, is maybe an indication that she was profiled. Maybe that's how she was actually landed up in this high profile role. But it's interesting that, since she left that cult, when was that? Do you remember that was in the 80s, or was it even earlier?
She was in a cult in the 1980s, and she actually, came out and talked about getting out of cults. And, but
and since she's developed quite a high profile over 30 years, it seems, in terms of building a profile within the conservative community as a real leader, as a real someone who could be turned to and someone who can make change. She started this groundswell organization with Steve Bannon as one of the key board members.
That's right.
And that organization is really how we landed up with the Trump agenda, or the MAGA agenda right now. So she really is not just an accidental tourist on this issue of the big lie.
No.
She's an originator. She's a creator of this. And so I have to say is her husband, because, Clarence Thomas is an unusual fella. He's not like any of the other justices. He certainly believes in a very, very unique view of the Constitution and how originalist, I guess they call themselves originalists, should govern within themselves within that justice, within the Supreme Court. And he's rare amongst that breed. So imagine if his wife is the person who's cultivating a Supreme Court or Supreme Court nominees that are going to fit his agenda. So she's out there acting like a political envoy, a lobbyist, whatever, for Clarence Thomas's thinking, and stacking the Supreme Court with people whom she believes will vote alongside him. And this is not conjecture. This is actually what she's been doing in the last 30 years. And so, I should point you to a couple of things that are really interesting. Clarence Thomas, for example, I didn't know this about him, has been the headline speaker at the Council for National Policy. There he is. He brought the gavel with him a couple of times. I don't know, Mr. Justice, it's not appropriate, is it, for you to be addressing the Council for National Policy? Here he is at your favorite, the Eagle Forum. Several times at the Eagle Forum, raising money for the Eagle Forum.
Ravioli with the marinara sauce?
I think he got a lot of
pizza with Provel cheese on it. He's done his time in St. Louis here.
He's done his time in St. Louis, and he's also raised a lot of money for the Eagle Forum. That's the Schlafly organization. So that's interesting. But then the thing that struck me the most, I mean, sometimes they say a picture tells it. What's the expression? Picture
worth 1,000 words.
It's worth 1,000 words. Thank you. Look at this photograph. This is Donald Trump's inauguration day. And there is Trump going out of his way to hang out with Clarence Thomas.
Look at George W. Bush's face.
Look at George W. Bush's face.
That's so great.
And Bill Clinton's face.
He got up on stage and he said, that was some weird shit.
Yeah. No, he's like looking at him like, what are you doing? And why are you talking to Clarence Thomas like that now? That's my judge. So it's interesting. And Bill Clinton doesn't look too pleased either on the other end. They think, whoever the guy is to the right, I don't recognize him, to the right of or behind Hillary over there. Also not very impressed. But, I just feel like this photograph says so much with George W. Bush.
Bush 43 is the star of that photo right there.
Yeah, he really is. That's the best face ever.
Yeah, this is
so, I don't know what's going on there. I heard a little bit back. So anyhow, let me tell you a little bit more, because I did one of my little charts. We love my little charts, right? So there's Ginni and there's Clarence.
Okay.
They're married. They've been married for a while. He really loves her. I mean, I say he really loves her, because these are the things he says about her. This is about the fact that the Anita Hill trial, a scandal that's almost brought down his term. He said the fiery trial through which we passed had the effect of melding us into one being, an amalgam, as we like to say. He calls her the rock of his life. And then he says she worked 24/7 every day in defense of liberty, adding, we are equally yoked and we love being with each other because we love the same things. So they're pretty close. I mean, they one and the same, really.
I have certainly nothing cynical to say about that. I mean, that's what everybody wants. So
ideally, yes.
Politics aside,
it sounds perfect. but their politics can be put
beautiful.
aside here, because in this case, she's being political and he's not allowed to be that political. And here he is. What do they call it? An amalgam? They're one person. And then she's claiming in front of the committee today that he knew none of this, that he was unaware of all this stuff. He's calling you an amalgam. He's calling you equally yoked. And it does seem like there's more, like he couldn't have been completely unaware.
I see where you were going with that now.
You see where I'm going with that. Now, also, interestingly enough, this fellow John Eastman, who's the architect, some people say, of January the 6th. Well, he's also Clarence Thomas's former clerk at the Supreme Court, so he knows Clarence pretty well. And he knows Ginni pretty well because they've spent a lot of time together at their home, where he has visited and stayed overnight on several occasions. So, it's possible that they didn't talk about the upcoming coup they were planning, but is it likely they weren't talking about the upcoming coup that they were planning? I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that if they're that close to both Clarence and Ginni, there's a good argument to be made that Eastman would have let his former boss know about this stuff and maybe checked with him. I don't know.
Again, I see where you're going here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. You want to see what the third little point on this little slide is? You see this guy on the left, I guess. Leonard Leo. You know Leonard Leo? The guy, the Federalist Society, the guy.
Leo.
You've heard of him. We've been speaking about him a lot, right? So he's the guy who's been building a very conservative Supreme Court, and he's been doing it for a very long time. And guess he's also very, very close friends with Ginni Thomas and Clarence Thomas. Very, very, very close friends. So you've got the guy who's organizing the coup on the one hand, architecting the coup on the one hand, who's close to the couple, who are an amalgam, who are a one yoke. And then you've got Leonard Leo, the guy who's stacking the court with conservative justices, also close to the couple. I don't know. There seems like there's a conflict of interest there. I mean, if you're going to adjudicate anything related to any election ever going forward in the United States, I think you've got a problem there.
Well, I just saw an article from the Los Angeles Times from 11 full years ago about how it had been revealed through some watchdog report that Clarence Thomas, who is, on the Supreme Court, he has to do financial disclosure.
Right.
So we know who's paying the people, that are in the highest court in the land right there. And I gather that they had underestimated Ginni's income from places like the Heritage Foundation by about $700,000.
Correct.
In a 3 or 4 year period.
It was a 5 year period. But yeah, you're right.
5 years.
Yeah.
Okay.
But a lot of money.
Six-figure salaries in DC are considered pretty material. That's not a gift or a luncheon here and there.
Yeah.
That's,
I believe she was working at other places too at the same time. I think she was at the Council for National Policy at the same time. She was at this groundswell organization that she and Steve Bannon started.
All the way back in 2011, or
she started that, I think, it must have been a long time ago. It was a long time ago they started Groundswell, and she was on the CNP, I think, from 2009, if I'm not mistaken. So, yeah, it looks to me like she could have been getting a lot more money on the side. Plus, she had a consultancy that they never declared. There was an anti-Obama consultancy firm that they launched because, they can be political, apparently. The thing, it's wrong. It's just wrong. I mean, you can say that Clarence Thomas is an independent mind and he's smart enough to separate what his wife is doing from what he's doing. But he is the only guy who actually voted that the committee should not get any documentation from the White House for the January 6th committee hearings. So, it's not like he's not shown us his cards a little bit here. We sort of know that he's looking to cover up the entire day. He was not willing to let an investigation get their hands on all the White House documentation. So I'm a little suspicious about what his end goals here are. And, then there's Steve Bannon. So Steve Bannon we've been speaking a lot about where his affiliation might be. We sort of land up around China a lot of the time because that's sort of where his most recent spy activity seems to have led him. Now, the group Groundswell was founded and was on the lines of trying to find this to front this. Sorry, I can't read this. I'm having a hard time. The group was founded, plotted and what it called.
The group she founded plotted what it called the 30-front war on hot-button issues and seeded talking points throughout the right-wing media, so coordinated media operations, which usually takes more than like one person.
Right? Yeah, it was a big committee. It had a lot of people on it, lots of really well-known, bold-named conservative people on this groundswell.
And so Bannon's own publication at the time, Breitbart News, was part of that. And I guess Bannon's quoted as saying, "She's an operator. She stays behind the scenes. Unlike a lot of people who just talk, Ginni Thomas gets shit done."
There you go. She's a very effective person. In fact, people really do credit her with creating this whole MAGA platform. Everything we understand today as being Donald Trump's MAGA platform is something she initiated as part of Groundswell with Steve Bannon, because, you know, Steve Bannon is an interesting guy. Look, it may not have been obvious to everyone that he was a intelligence asset, but, you know, he's been hanging around her for a long, long time, which means he's probably been under her influence, or she has been under his influence for a very long time. And then you have to really question, you know, has the Supreme Court Justice's wife been compromised by an intelligence asset? You know, going back many, many years, it's quite feasible that in fact happened. Not just one intelligence asset, because guess what? She's also, as we pointed out the other day on the show, is close to Michael Flynn, because Michael Flynn was a board member with her at the Council for National Policy. So, you know, you've got Mr. Digital Soldiers guy, Mike Flynn, alongside Ginni, and you've got Steve Bannon alongside Ginni. Here's a woman who is, you know, predisposed to believing conspiracy theories, predisposed to taking parts in cults, and you could see how they could be feeding her all sorts of lies and information over a long period of time, and, you know, really changing her thinking, really corrupting her thinking. These two, of course, were part of the White House together, so they know each other quite well, and apparently still speak to each other regularly. I mean, these guys are not, you know, not strangers to each other. And you asked me the other day about, you know, them being members of the same committee. There's their actual cards from Zoom Info, where they're both part of the Council for National Policy's committee, action committee. So, you know, there's no doubt they worked together in the last few years to build all the stuff up, to build the big lie, to build the QAnon movement, to build all this MAGA movement. And then, you know, and then there's also Steve Bannon. So you've got two possible intelligence assets around a Supreme Court justice, and who knows if wife, and who knows if they were around the Supreme
Flynn
Court
is
justice.
not a possible intelligence asset. He's an agent of foreign powers.
Yes, that's true. That's true.
So, you know, what you're getting at here is that Ginni and thus her husband, they are political operatives that are not loyal to this country. And he's on the Supreme Court, and he's got to go. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that these guys maybe have been compromised to the extent that they might not even realize that they're compromised. I mean, they'll certainly argue that they are, but it's no, you know, you can't have this appearance in the public in this way, where you've got all these allegations that are factually based, that are really true about her and her, you know, belief in this monstrous conspiracy theory that almost brought down the American Constitution and almost stole an election from the American people, and that there's intelligence operatives running around her. That's not a good look. You know, it's just not okay. You know,
in the United States, we expect our judges to be impartial. We expect them to interpret the law. We don't expect them to be without opinions or about beliefs about or interpretations of the law. And we have structures such that they can be, you know, they can get oversight from a higher court, or if something's very noxious, the legislature can change the law. You know, it's quite an interest. You know, it's a really good system, actually.
Yeah.
But
it doesn't really apply to justice.
I don't think it depends on independence. And if you are, you know, if you are expected to be a district judge in federal court, or on a circuit court of appeals, or even all the way up at the, you know, the Supreme Court, or if you're just a local municipal judge, we expect you to interpret the law and to, you know, do it without fear or favor, and if you're tied into a giant foreign ideological movement with a bunch of spies, I guess you can't do that very well. So maybe you should, be a pet groomer or run a flower shop or do something else other than sit on the highest court in the land.
Truthfully, the justices don't have these kind of regulations. I mean, they sort of apply to judges. They've never been adopted by the justices. So, they sort of self-regulate the justices, but this is a kind of a glaring problem. This is not just like a little problem. This is you're going to try overthrow the constitution of the country, kind of problem. And you're going to steer the courts in a conservative direction with the aid of intelligence assets who are trying to help you stack the court. I mean, it's serious. It's not something we can just say, oh, Ginni looks like a very nice lady. And I'm sure she is a very nice lady in person, but she's been operating or has, succumbed to pressures that are make it impossible for her husband to still serve on that court, in my opinion. And there's more. There's Cleta Mitchell, who's a lawyer for Steve Bannon. She's a lawyer for Donald Trump. She's a lawyer for a whole bunch of people on the right wing. Also, it's interesting that she is partnered with Steve Bannon in this organization he called CORE, the Citizens of the American Republic. CORE was what he did after the Mercers ditched him way back in 2018. They ditched him and he decided, well, I'm going to start my own Citizens for the American People. The description of what this organization does is laughable, but it basically makes documentaries and supports Donald Trump in whichever way it can. And as you can see there, in 2018, they raised little dog is making a lot of noise around here. At 2018, they raised a $4.5 million from $2 million from a single donor. They will not declare who that is. And then the rest came from smaller donors. They don't have to because it's a nonprofit. And then this is how they spent that money. They spent $250,000 went to Bannon for his films. $40,000 went to Sean Bannon, his nephew. $20,000 went to his sister, Mary Meredith. And sorry, give me 1 second. I just got to do something here quickly. So I'll throw this up full screen and see if I can get my pooch to be quiet.
Use Wowengi's private planes.
Well, that's true. Yes. So they also they see this $1.1 million in other expenses. Can you imagine writing that down at your work? I just have other expenses.
One day.
And then you see the $1.4 million in conferences. Because can you imagine spending that much on conferences? Well, it's possible. It's possible if you're Steve Bannon. And so they put that down in the actual tax returns, which I find kind of just, the gall of that is amazing. And then they also use Guy's Wing's private planes, which is illegal. And they were actually slapped for that because they broke campaign finance laws by using foreign individuals' money, which is the value of the private planes that they were using. This is all the big, the big wall scam, the big wall. Yeah. This is where they laundered the money through. This is where many believe, I should say, it's not officially known, but many believe that Bannon laundered all the money that they stole from MAGA supporters when they said that they were going to build the wall themselves. It went through this nonprofit, which is tied to a Chinese spy named Wengi, who we know is a Chinese spy, and is also tied to Cleta Mitchell, who's literally written there as a secretary, who is Ginni Thomas's really, really, really good friend. So, yet another potentially compromised person in the Ginni Thomas orbit. And Cleta Mitchell is not only that, she's also, in addition to being a witness or participant in the call in the Fulton County case, where she was the one saying, help us found those 17,000 votes, whatever Donald Trump was saying, she's on that call. So, yeah, it's a lot of issues around Ginni Thomas, that it's not just about the big lie. It's just, there's a lot of issues.
So I think I know why Samuel Alito was quoted by CNN saying something about how he resented that people questioned the integrity of the Supreme Court. But sorry, dude.
It doesn't look very good. It just doesn't look good.
Look at this stuff.
Yeah, it's there. This is a money laundering operation that she was involved in. Money laundering $2 million from MAGA supporters for allegedly faking. No, she's not indicted for it. he is. Bannon is indicted for it. Guo managed to get off by pleading the fifth all the way through it. But this is a case now that's in front of the New York courts, and it's I believe he's going to get in trouble for it. He's not going to get off on this one. So there's questions, many more questions. Here's the actual. If you want to read it, it doesn't say very much in this particular section, but it goes on to explain all this other what they say they're going to do as a business, and it's kind of nebulous, and they do none of it, but they just steal the $2 million into Bannon's pockets, presumably, or to hire operatives, or to who knows what they did. So that's we showed you one side of the slide, which was, hey, there's a problem with the fact that she's associated with the fact that they've stacked the courts, and there's a problem with the fact that she's associated with the guy who architected Jan 6, and there's a problem that Clarence knows both Leo and John Eastman really, really well. That's one side of the issue around Ginni Thomas. The other side of this issue is that she's been working with these intelligence assets for 30 years, or a period of time, or people have been compromised by intelligence assets in trying to build this agenda, this extreme right-wing agenda, which has also involved money laundering and all sorts of other things in order to fund that agenda. And it just all looks gross. It's disgusting. And I'm not saying she's a criminal, because I'm not sure if she's really a believer in the big lie or not. But however she got to this point is enough for me to say that he can't sit on the Supreme Court, because they are a amalgam, as he called it, of one yoke. They are one and the same being. And it's true politically that this is what they've been doing for a long period of time. They've been politically seeking to make the Supreme Court far more conservative. They made no secrets of that. They were both celebrated for doing that at the recent Heritage dinner, when he was praised by Mitch McConnell in this really odd, by the way, really strange statement, which I'm just going to put up here, and then I'll be done with Ginni here. But this is Mitch McConnell saying, Mitch McConnell, the Senate Republican leader, called Thomas a legal titan and the brightest possible North Star. Playing to the crowd of nearly 250 of his party's elite, he dryly asked, what could I, Mitch McConnell, possibly know about a notable leader who is parsimonious with his public statements, who shuns the performative aspect of public life, and who is viewed as a bogeyman by the radical left? What would I know about that? Ha ha ha. Amongst the crowd's laughter, Thomas's deep baritone was most audible. Basically saying publicly, I'm in on this. I know exactly what's going on here. I am in on the Thomas agenda here to make the Supreme Court as right-wing as possible. So there's your Senate angle in there. I
just want to say it's not conservative. There's nothing conservative about that. Calvin Coolidge was conservative. Mm-hmm. This is not conservative.
Yeah, I mean, their policies are extreme. They're just extremist, and they're minority views, and they're being posed on the majority. And they're wrong. Clearly, they're wrong, and certainly trying to take down the U.S. Constitution, trying to overturn an election, overthrow the U.S. president who's legally and lawfully elected, is seditious. Seditious. It just is. It is. It's seditious. It's and if it were anybody else other than Ginni Thomas, this person would be in jail. This person would be behind bars, I think. I mean, if it was any other grouping, maybe I should say, than this particular grouping of people.
This is a huge network of folks, and we're getting to see the people at the very top of it, and we're getting to see what they had in mind, which was a seditious takeover of the country. So
it's kind of ugly. It's not even kind of ugly, it just is ugly. And I know people are going to want to excuse her in a little bit of this over the next few days. And, I think that there is despite who she is, and she might appear to be a very nice person, she seems to be quite nice, but there is no reason that we can let this go. I mean, we can't let this slide, because our next elections could be decided by this very same court. And I think if people, it's kind of obvious he shouldn't be there. It's kind of obvious he should retire, or at least recuse himself from any Supreme Court, decisions related to the elections. It seems like he can't offer a fair decision on anything. And if we allow him to continue to sit there, and if we allow him to pass judgment on future elections, we risk the Constitution again. So it's not one of those things where we can just say, oh, well, it's never going to happen again. It is going to happen. We know it's going to happen.
Yeah, the notion that a court is going to decide our election, that's the sign that there's a problem.
Yeah, and that's the
Because these things
strategy.
were going to, and that was this. Well, that was the thing, to cast doubt on it so that it could go to the courts. It speaks much more about the compromise in our judiciary.
This is a big issue. It'll be interesting to see how everyone tackles it. I'm looking forward to seeing how this continues to be a big story. I mean, certainly the committee let him get away with it today, but that doesn't mean they'll continue to do so going forward. I want to bring Michael McCain in just 1 second here and talk about Russia, talk about the potential for a world war. Are we heading into a world war? It's quite possible, some people say, as they look at the events of the last few days with Putin calling up as many as 1 million reservists and men, just in general, not necessarily trained soldiers. And we'll talk to Michael right after this. Every minute of Narratives reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives.
Every minute of Narratives reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives.
And welcome back. Michael McKay is joining us from Ottawa. How are you, Michael? It's good to see you again. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. Good to see you.
We have some news out of involving Russia today. So before we get to the actual, big geopolitical issues around Putin and maybe Xi, let's talk a little bit about the news today, because there was some interesting news about Deripaska, Oleg Deripaska. Eric, do you want to fill us in on what happened?
Southern District of New York unsealed charges against Russian oligarch Oleg Deripaska in a National Enquirer level mix of sanctions evasion and scandal, where he tried to in evading sanctions and having people buy him clothing. Apparently, I think he has some favorite American Eagle T-shirts, extra large. He wanted 10-pack, and he wanted some iPhones, and he also wanted his girlfriend to give birth to his first child on American soil. So I'm reading down the indictment. We get to anchor baby number 1, and then I flip a couple pages down, and I had to update the tweets because not one, count them, 2 Russian oligarch anchor babies.
No, this is not his first baby. I think it's incorrect to say it's his first baby, because I believe he's had other babies with other mothers. He's quite a big, prolific dad, as it were. He likes to have children.
He has a lot of money and a lot of options.
Yeah. So because I care about these things a lot, and because I had to do the research, I try to figure out who she is. This is her next to him, and next to Lavrov. It turns out there's the same escort as she's referred to in this particular photo here, but maybe she's not an escort. She's just his girlfriend. I'll get you her name and share it.
Ekaterina Voronina.
Yes. Well, yes. We've got Ekaterina. Ekaterina here is also in a
AKA Ekaterina Lobanova. Okay, so we were trying to look her up, and we got to a decathlete who was pretty fierce looking, but didn't look like oligarch arm candy. And then we found another very sweet looking PhD in poli-sci, but who looked very middle class. Wow. So
I found her.
I didn't see any photos of Lavrov. So I'm looking.
She is. She's also the interesting thing is I found her.
Not up. I'm looking at the.
Oh, so you haven't seen it? Here we go. Here she is. I'm sorry. I should have shared that with you before. This is her and the escort arrow, and there's the oligarch Deripaska, Oleg Deripaska to her left. Now to her right is Sergei Lavrov, her boss sometimes at the foreign ministry there, and also his former mistress. Because this is where I found the photo. Is that. She was previously involved in a scandal involving he, and that's his other wife, mistress.
Who's?
Lavrov's. It's next to
Lavrov's.
Yeah, so there's Oleg Deripaska to the very right of the picture. Then his girlfriend that he wants to have an American baby with, and to the right of her is the foreign minister of Russia, and to the right of him is his first mistress / wife. I don't think they're
Is
married.
Lavrov's mistress? It doesn't matter. Who's the strip club owner?
Oh, he's the guy in the front there. That's he's
Not the woman in the orange T-shirt.
No. They were on vacation, all of them together. They love to vacation together. This is in I think it's Japan, is it? I don't know. And they are and they're the strip club owner where I think she had previously worked. So anyhow, I mean, what does that mean? His indictment's been sealed. It means he's been indicted, right, for trying to do these terrible things.
And the two others were, I believe, maybe three others were indicted for violating the Emergency Economic Powers Act sanctions. If we say that you're a specially, SNA or SDA, specially designated individual, whatever the terminology is, you're on the bad guy list. Then you can't come here. You can't do any business with that person. And so he had Russians in the United States helping him buy iPhones, buy American Eagle T-shirts, and try to have a child on U.S. soil so a member of his family could have U.S. citizenship.
Did in fact have a child in U.S. soil. That child is now a U.S. citizen.
Child one is a U.S. citizen, and I think they intercepted this when they were trying to put baby number 2 down here.
Deripaska is actually a really big figure in all of this. I mean, the fact that he's actually hanging out with Lavrov is an indicator of how close he is to the inner circle of Vladimir Putin, and how during the entire Trump-Russia scandal, call it what you will, and the Ukraine attack on the first initial attack on Ukraine. I mean, he was the guy directing a lot of this information. He was the central to this whole thing. In fact, I believe was one of the people who hired Klimnik to do what he was doing with Manafort. So, this is Deripaska is a key figure here. The fact that he's been indicted and under these sanctions is key because he's escaped sanctions before because of Mitch McConnell's, willingness to have a plant be built in his state. So this is a big deal that he's being indicted.
Two more things, I'm surprised you didn't lead with this. You already had a quote from Mitch McConnell, who's of Kentucky, and Deripaska, after his sanctions, was still investing in metal plants in Kentucky.
Yeah. He actually got the sanctions. The original sanctions were lifted because he got the plants in Kentucky. That's what Mitch got as a gift. I don't know if that plant ever got to be a reality. Michael, you might know a lot about Mr. Deripaska. Do you? Do you know about his history in Ukraine, or is this out of your zone of experience?
It's out of my zone, and it's dropped further out of it over the past year.
Okay, so we won't press you on that one, but let's get the other bit of news that came out today, and then we'll talk more about Putin and company. Eric, the news came out of a espionage scandal involving Johns Hopkins University and the hospital there.
We got 2 back-to-back. This was a huge day of DOJ, going criminal on Russian espionage activities, because I'm going to count Deripaska's sanctions busting as him trying to plant, future agents here, him still operating in the United States. But the next 2 stories, there was one of 2 doctors, a major in the United States Army who was posted as a physician at Fort Bragg, which is the head of U.S. Army Strategic or Special Operations Command, or Strategic SOC at any rate, and the 18th Airborne, and this doctor and Russian spouse, also a physician in the state of Maryland. They were conspiring with who they assumed to be an agent of the Russian government working at the embassy, and they were transferring sensitive, protected health information on military members and their family to the Russians. And I believe this physician had knowledge of how the United States was training the Ukrainian army on how to do battlefield hospitals. So this is very tactical kind of stuff. And looking at the dates of the events in the indictments there, it's like from 5 weeks ago. So this is like,
recent.
Obviously our radar is on super sensitive for people that are messing around in the espionage space. And the story in Denver is, is real quick. Is and less important in some ways. It's still going to be a lifetime jail sentence for this cat. But the guy who worked at the National Security Agency for a whopping 1 month before taking a leave of absence, and then somebody approached him, hey, would you like to sell us any, do you have anything you'd like us to know? We come to understand that you have Russian heritage. And he's like, yeah, I do. And yes, I'd love to sell you some things. And in both cases, both of these folks, both of these groups here were talking to undercover agents working for the United States. The cat in Denver was going to meet the agent yesterday, and they slapped an indictment on him that was unsealed this morning. So that is how sensitive the U.S. counterintelligence apparatus is right now. Not just and by the way, counterintelligence is mostly watch, wait, see what they want, not slap charges on people, deport people, put them in jail. That's not the soul of counterintelligence. And there's relatively few espionage cases. And so if you watch this space, to have 3 cases like this in a single day is off the chain, and it should tell Putin and his people it's over, pal.
Well, it certainly is not encouraging anyone to do any espionage. I mean, if you think you're going to get away with it, not a good time. Like Michael, you've been waiting so patiently. Let's bring you in here. And there is a lot of serious things going on here. In addition to these espionage cases in Russia, there's an attempt to draft 300,000, maybe as many as 1 million people into the war on Ukraine. And this is not appearing to be that successful, but they are, of course, successful in drafting quite a few. And so there's a lot of people who are going to be pushed into the war zone there, into the battlefront. And these are people who are going to have very poor equipment. By all accounts, some of these equipment is rusted. They've been asked to bring equipment from home. They're not well trained. We're looking at a potential, bloodbath in eastern Ukraine. Do you want to talk a little bit about how it's being perceived in Ukraine and the impact that this might have on the war so far?
Yeah. Well, I want to draw a distinction between how we perceive it and how it is perceived in Ukraine, and also by Russians themselves. When we hear a term like partial mobilization of reservists, which is how this was first announced, we think of something very normal and something we're familiar with, at least historically, right? About what that would mean. But in fact, it's nothing of the kind. And in fact, we really shouldn't look at it as a military thing. This is more akin to a press gang, and is really a political measure with a large element of ethnic cleansing. The purpose is to get large numbers of people from colonized regions of Russia, colonized in the 18th and 19th century, into the army, to get them out of the regions, and to do 2 things at the same time. First of all, get them away from a place where they could be disruptive to central power in Moscow, and then to a place where they are also very likely to be killed, and if not killed, become prisoners and become a burden on Ukraine. But in any event, not a problem for Putin. So if we think about it in military terms, we say this is crazy. Old men who are unwell and maybe with no military training, and then given antiquated equipment. And there's a lot of videos about this. And that's all true. And it looks insane if we think about it as a military measure and as something that is saying, oh, how is our Russian offensive going to succeed because of this? Well, they're not. And
this is really you saying
we look at it in an old-fashioned sense of, quantity equals quality, which is certainly not at all true in modern circumstances, not in the slightest. It might have been true up until the First World War, but we know that's not true anymore.
So you're alleging that this is an ethnic cleansing, an attempt to cleanse Russia of its ethnic minorities. In fact, even more than that, push these ethnic minorities into Eastern Europe, where they will have to be settled. I mean, let's assume all these, the Ukrainians aren't interested in participating in the mass slaughter of all these Russians. They're going to be confronted with that choice of either you kill these ethnic minorities or you capture them where do you put them? I mean, where do you put these million people that show up from the ethnic minorities in Russia who are pouring over into Eastern Europe and potentially Poland and
And
other
the point is
countries?
that it's disruptive, it's chaotic.
Hmm.
There's no plan here.
Mm.
There's no master
It's
plan
designed to
at
be, yeah.
all. It's just that it is certain to lead to chaos, disruption, mass casualties, and so on. And that actually is the point.
Now, there's also, the flip side of that. There is actually a real brain drain happening because not all but a lot of the very, more able to be mobile and economically equipped people are finding their way out of Russia because they don't want to be called up. And so you're seeing these satellite images. These are from two different borders on either side. One is from Georgia, one's from Mongolia. And you can see the backup of people and the car jams of people trying to get out of Russia. It's believed that there are more people trying to leave Russia right now than were originally part of the invading force into Ukraine. So you've got a remarkably big number of people who are going to be affecting the economy in a much bigger way, because these are not the same people that are just being called up and might be thrown in there as cannon fodder. These are Russians who are seeking to leave the country and not return. And it's expected that they will cause economic chaos in Russia by the winter because they are so important to the economy.
Yes, but I think we should also not underestimate the disruptive effect on the countries they're going to.
Mm-hmm.
The Ukrainian ambassador made a speech today in which he made a point that Ukrainians are talking about extensively, that these Russians are not actually anti-war Russians.
Mm-hmm.
What they are is, to a large extent, a Trojan horse. They remain sympathetic to the imperialist goals of the Russian state. They remain hostile to the very idea of the existence of Ukraine. They simply don't want to be the ones who get killed doing it. And that is how we should see them. So the language that of them being somehow refugees is really a disservice to true refugees who are fleeing a conflict that has been thrust upon them. These are people who are seeking to evade the consequences of the war that the nation they constitute caused in the first place. So, yes, and also we think about the disruptive effect about the economy in Russia, but that's certainly not the way the Putin regime thinks. He's never had an economic consideration.
Not with China paying all the bills
that we're familiar with in economic terms. It's just it's his turf as a crime lord. That's all his view of what Russia is. So that's not really a factor for it.
But it's a really your take there is not something I had heard before, and it's really interesting. The fact that we could be seeing sort of a what can we call it, a population landmine that's waiting for Eastern Europe and for Europe.
I can tell you that what I just briefly explained is the overwhelming view among Ukrainians.
Wow. Eric, any thoughts on that? That's an interesting take Michael's got.
Absolutely, and I hadn't thought of this as this it seems like a suicidal push towards the West that doesn't have any real chance of succeeding militarily. But the Putin regime is having is weakened by the economic constraints put on by sanctions, and perhaps all the different forces acting against the Putin regime. And Russia is a very ethnically diverse place, and they have lots of potential breakaway regions. And if, they get weak in Moscow, those regions, who might be also, given some impetus by, outside intelligence services, maybe some of them are, some of them NATO and whatnot. Some of them might be Chinese, might want to break the country up or, sow discord, getting out men of a certain age and specific people, definitely, and sending them into this other part of the world would help perhaps give Putin a little more time. And then as far as resettling populations in different places where they are likely to cause future disturbances, that is a historic pattern there as well. So, and I hadn't thought of any of that and what's going on. So
and don't
that's a
forget,
really key insight.
China owns a lot of Siberia. It owns a lot of these parts of Russia. They also have a huge issue feeding their population. If there's less population in eastern Russia, maybe there's more ways for them to feed their people in China. So that might be another piece of that, in terms of the ethnic cleansing piece you're talking about there, that it could play into China's need for more arable land and just more space, really. That's interesting. Interesting take.
And also, Zev, I think it's interesting, the photographs you showed of people entering Georgia, and I think you said Mongolia. I know people are also going to Kazakhstan. But what you didn't show was a photograph of Russians going to Estonia. There's a land border at Narva. And the reason is Estonia, along with Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, and I believe the Czech Republic, have closed their borders to Russians, all of them, because they're all aware of this Trojan horse aspect of these men fleeing mobilization, who are not, in fact, war resistors at all.
I'm not a big Rome expert, but if I'm not mistaken, that's how Rome fell. It didn't have to do with refugees coming in and betraying. There's something around that. If anyone knows, I'd be interested if they could share it with me on DM or otherwise. But I think that is how Rome ultimately fell, was through a refugee crisis. Sorry, Eric, you were jumping in there and I was interrupting you.
No, I'll DM you about Rome.
Okay. So let me, the other thing is, this all seemed to happen right after the meeting with Xi and Putin, where Putin was like, we understand you've got some concerns, and Xi didn't say a thing about Ukraine, which was weird, because normally that kind of language is negotiated before. We're going to say, we understand you have some concerns, and then you'll say what your concerns are. But Xi didn't say his concerns, and then he came back to Moscow, and the next thing you know, he's calling up 1 million people. It feels like they are coordinating this dance. I mean, clearly they're, unified on this. We've seen enough photographs of them together, showing us how unified they are. And it's clear that it's China that's really footing the bill for this war in Russia, because they're backstopping all the losses that Putin is making. What's your take on Xi and how he is positioning himself in this battle, and how he's perceived in Ukraine as well? What is China's role in Ukraine? Michael?
Oh gosh.
Tough one.
Yeah. I don't see it as a factor, really, in what I see from Ukrainian sources and so on.
That's fair.
It's just invisible. What can I say?
It's very much in my mind's eye these days, because we're doing so much investigation into China's role in the attack on democracy. So I'm very familiar with with what they're trying to achieve there. Eric, do you have any take on it? Of what Xi and Putin? I mean, what I'm really trying to get at is how is this partnership is so key to what's happening in the world right now, whether it's the attack on democracy or the attack on Ukraine. How do you force that apart? How do you do you crack that open so they're not, that Putin isn't so reliant on Xi?
Well, look, it is a fairly invisible partnership. Most people don't think of China's role in Ukraine, and it's not very obvious. But you go digging, and it's certainly in there. And I think guys like Ihor Kolomoisky had plenty of deals with the Chinese, and that's part of what's been getting dug out. And it's one of the interesting parts of this war, is that it's really breaking up the China-Russia partnership and the China-Ukraine partnership, certainly the mob elements in Ukraine. So I wonder if that meeting between Putin and Xi was Xi said, we're pulling the plug on the cash here, guys, and so now we're getting towards this end game. And that's where now Putin's going to send all these different folks across the border. But I doubt Putin's going to make it to Portugal in this big push.
Well, I mean, just sending all these people. He did this in Poland, where he sent all these refugees across the border there, or attempted to send all these refugees across the border that he was importing from Syria. If this is his strategy to, along with cutting off all the gas supplies to to Russia through Nord Stream. I mean, how do you say it? It's Nord Stream.
Nord Stream.
Yeah,
Nord Stream
that sabotage of Nord Stream is believed to have been undertaken by Russia itself, taking away Germany's supply of this gas, of natural gas for the winters. In addition to that, you're going to throw 1 million people into there, or millions of people, depending on you're talking about the refugees or the soldiers you've been drafting. It could cause chaos in Europe, which is already struggling with energy supplies this winter, and the rise of the right wing there as well. Too broad. Tell me about Vladimir Zelensky and how he's reacting to all of this, Michael.
I think the way he's reacting to it is being a voice for the Ukrainian people. The language in Ukraine is not about Putin, and it really hasn't been much about Putin for many, many years. It's about Russians and about what they're doing in Ukraine. And that's what his message is directed to. It's a message of hope for Ukrainians who are overwhelmingly convinced that they will win this war and liberate all of their territory. And it's a message directed at Russians, and it's a message that works at their weak spots. Messages to soldiers, things that they know in their hearts are true. You will come to Ukraine, you will be abandoned by your officers, you will be left with no resources, and if you're killed, your family will get no money. So and therefore your best option is to surrender, and there's very clear ways to do that. Mm-hmm. And then they emphasize what Russians are doing in Ukraine, which is committing genocide. And that's what his messaging is. And this galvanizes support amongst Ukrainians. And it also is a goad to Western supporters to be more forthcoming with weapons, which they have to be. Mm-hmm. So I think his messaging is... and I would also say one other thing, and it's really important to his success. He leaves the generals alone. Mm-hmm. And that is a massive difference between him and Putin, who's micromanaging the Battle of Liman, for example, and the battle in Kherson, which he's losing both. Liman more quickly than Kherson.
The Russians are losing a lot, but there has been a huge toll as well on Ukrainians. I don't know what the current death toll on Ukrainians is, but it's, there are lots of families that have been had to leave their homes. There's lots of families that no longer have dads or moms, and it's been hugely shattering to the social fabric over there.
But the response is not hopelessness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. They've been very strong.
It is the opposite of that. And the response of Russians increasingly is. Mm-hmm. They are now in a state of panic. And this is palpable if you look at Russian language social media. So it's the response to adversity. Mm-hmm. Ukrainians know they're in a righteous cause. They are conscious about the suffering. They honor their dead, but it doesn't shake their resolve to go forward no matter what to victory. Whereas the resolve of Russians can and is being broken in the face of their casualties.
Yeah, it's kind of amazing, Eric, just a final note here, that we're seeing, Russia, this supposedly great nation with this great army, falling apart. There's no other way to describe it. You've got, people fleeing from being drafted. You've got others being drafted, but, anticipating having to die. Fighting with rusted weapons. This is certainly not the great Russia of old.
Great Russia of old, when these are the guys that used to send people out, with no boots, and would send unarmed people up front to take, ammunition and leave the more veteran soldiers in the back. And this is an army that puts its machine guns behind its soldiers in case they flee.
Just one quick anecdote about why Russia is going to lose. The Russian word for mobilization, mobilizatsiya, has been adjusted by one letter among Russians to be mogilizatsiya. Mogila, one letter, mogila means grave, the tomb. So you're being called up in mobilization is now mogilization. It is your funeral.
That is a good note.
And it is Russians who are saying this, and then Ukrainians just amplify it right back to them. They're masters of propaganda because they do understand the Russian people.
On that note, let's leave it for tonight. It's 8 o'clock. It's time for us to go. Thank you very much, Michael McKay, for being here. It's been good to see you again, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the near future as things develop in Russia and Ukraine. And thank you, Eric. It's good to see you, as always. We'll see you again next Tuesday, where we've got another big show coming up. Rachel's going to be in on Tuesday. She's going to give us an election forecast from her research. So we'll talk to Rachel Bitterkoffer on Tuesday about that. If you'd like to support Narrative, you can always do that at patreon.com/narrative. That's patreon.com/narrative. We rely on you to make programming like this, so please support us at patreon.com. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And otherwise, have a great night, everybody. Every minute of Narrative's reporting, every story that we break is made possible by our patrons. You too can become a patron by joining at patreon.com/narrative.
Narrative, where truth lives. One day, you'll tell the story of autocrats, crooks, and kings who came for our freedom. A story of citizens who stood up to tyranny and won. The people prevailed and renewed an old vow to a more perfect union. And that was just the beginning. The story continues. Narrative, where truth lives.